Carmen Reeves. She had conflict come up at the last minute this morning, so you're stuck with me. So we'll go ahead and start with introductions. I think it's appropriate. That's what we usually do. So we'll start with the commission, Mike, and we'll just go around the room. I'm sorry.
Mike Bott, representing Southern Ring.
Good morning, everybody. I'm Bob Baumgartner. I represent the Northwest region.
Bruce Korn, I represent Eastern Oregon from Ontario.
Good morning, Eric Quims, North Central.
Good morning, Joe Mall, West Central.
Tom Byler, Oregon Water Resources Department staff.
Jennifer Brandstrom-Smith, Oregon Water Resources Department staff.
Could we go ahead and go around the audience here for just a minute for the record? Start with you, Ken.
Ken Starr, Oregon Water Resources Department staff.
Okay.
Claire Clark, Platinum's Conservation District.
Donovan Simple, Oregon Groundwater Association.
Dwight French, Water Resources Department.
London Wellness, Oregon Farm Bureau intern.
Sean, go ahead. Sean Ortiz Turner, Oregon Water Resources staff.
Okay.
Peggy Lynch, League of Women Voters of Oregon. Good morning.
Good morning. Welcome, everyone. Glad to have everyone here today. First item on our agenda is approval of minutes, and of course, we're aware that we went to electronic recording of our minutes here at the last meeting, so I guess this would be really the first official electronic recorded approval. So I assume we just do that by motion like we would normally. So is there a motion to approve the minutes as recorded?
So moved.
Is there a second?
I'll second.
Been moved and seconded that we approve the minutes as recorded. Any further questions or discussion? If not, we'll go ahead and vote the motion. I think we can do that just by voice. So all those in favor?
Aye.
Aye. Any opposed? Motion carries. Okay, second item, commissioner comments. So, Joe, are you okay to start? We'll start from right to left today instead of left to right, if that's okay.
Sure.
Okay.
Again, apologize that I was only able to join the tour midway yesterday morning, driving up from Eugene and then getting off highway and taking a lot of back roads and detours and things. It was great to see. I've driven through that country a few times, mostly going to Silver Falls, but to see the agriculture in full bloom, so to speak, and to see a lot of water running in irrigation ditches and coming into town was just a good immersion in an area that, especially with some of the core questions about what to do about retrofitting the dams upstream, and just nice to get out of the city, enter that landscape, and be able to think about some of the issues we're facing. Because I'm coming from an area that, after the April rains and snow, thanks Ken for getting all that dialed in for us, quite frankly, was a wake-up in a lot of ways about dams and their limits and the aging infrastructure in the river. All three of the rivers, four of the rivers that come together as the Willamette there in the Springfield, Eugene, Coburg area. We're seeing a lot of dikes starting to fail. And I think that from a river health perspective, it can be a good thing when a river's allowed to meander more. From the perspective of someone who's expecting irrigation water or expecting protection from a flood, we've got some pretty big changes ahead of us that are going to impact not only where we choose to do things, but what we're able to do. So it's nice to have water available, and I hope that statewide we take this chance to look at not just what we need, but how to really integrate it along the lines of our strategic planning efforts here, and look forward to hearing a little bit more about the ongoing discussions of from the governor's office about integrating water across agencies, because even the mild flooding that we had was a real wake-up call. So appreciate that opportunity. Thanks.
Thank you. Mr. Quims.
Good morning. I enjoyed both the tour of the water systems and the nursery very much, and appreciate the time of those people to take us through those systems and talk about their goals and some of their challenges. And also I'm thinking about the Willamette system and potential reallocation issues and all of that. And the fact that even though we're in this basin where relative to the rest of Oregon, it's considered to be relatively water-rich, there's still challenges in meeting water supply now and in the future. And so I guess my biggest takeaway, my biggest comment this morning is that we're going to need some consistent, I think, outreach and kind of direction on where the 100-year vision might go for Oregon, and formalizing that process and where there will be opportunities for input. And I just think it's important that we start that process. I know it has yet to be fully developed, but I'm really looking forward to that. I think that will be very important. We need to try to address these proactively as much as possible. So, thank you.
Thank you. Mr. Todd.
Yeah, thank you. A couple things. The tour was amazing yesterday. I thank you to staff for setting that up. I think, again, the takeaway as we think about the issues in the Willamette Basin, I think the presentation from the water, water resource folks that presented the planning side of things for the area really resonated well with me again. We talk about how well our place-based planning is going, and that's just a small portion of the state. And everywhere that we have had the place-based planning, we've seen nothing but successes in bringing all the parties together and talking about solutions for their watershed. And there are so many more watersheds, and we think about how huge the Willamette is, and that funding and planning for the future for the planning effort is so critical to make sure we have successful transition to meet those issues. And that really struck me again yesterday as I listened to how well that small piece of the pie went under their own accord. They actually pursued that kind of interaction on their own. So I really can't reiterate how important that is for us to continue aggressively trying to get planning money. And it gets to, I think, the Commissioner's point about outreach and public outreach. Success is important. Solutions, combined solutions are critical. And so I really just think, again, after yesterday and seeing the success that we had, I can't overemphasize how important that next step is for us. The other thing, I was in Medford a couple weeks ago, and I worked for the city of Ashland for 8 years. I actually saw snow on the mountain in June, and I was so pleased because I'm pretty sure in the whole 9 years I worked there, I never saw snow on the mountain in June, so I was just ecstatic, at least for 1 year, to see the snowpack there. And I think I think I'll just leave it at, I don't want to deter from this planning conversation I'd like us to continue to have, and how important that is for, I think, the state. So, thank you.
Thanks, Bruce. Just a couple of things I'd like to touch on. Like others, I'd like to reflect a little bit on yesterday's tour. I thought it was a great tour. What did really strike me, though, was the number of issues, for lack of a better term, we could find within a half a day's drive around our state's capital. There's clearly a lot of tension with water needs, the dams, the needs for cold, clean water for fish, as well as even the demands for water that can be treated to remove cyanotoxins, of all things, for human drinking water. And what also struck me, though, as we thought about this was, I'll back up one step. I want to also appreciate the nursery's visit, and especially their really positive attitude for how they were managing their water supply and seeing that as a resource that they were using. So they're trying to optimize not only the needs for them, but the in-stream needs, and doing some restoration on their streams running through the nursery. So I think that should be commended. But what also struck me was the water measurements that we have, or that we saw. And I know it takes quite a bit of time and effort to get those good, accurate water measurements. But as I think about these issues that we have before us, having those good measurements are going to be critical to resolving the complex issues that we face to balance those water needs. And I think about how intractable they will be if we can't even understand how much water is moving around. And I know the company I work with, we've been looking at ways to better measure flow, reaching out to other areas of the world where they have real dry conditions, trying to get a better understanding of how we can measure or get measurements of flow and get them quickly and in real time. And I just think we can't let go of that, because what gets measured gets done, and I think that will help us work to collaboratively resolve issues rather than get an intractable issue because we simply can't measure what we're talking about. And then to move off of that, I also wanted to touch real quickly on the water supplies that we have up in the Northwest. It's in February, we were really looking at what we thought was a very dire water situation for us. We had started to release water for in-stream uses earlier than we ever had before, and then we were able to get a lot of rain for some reason, at least in our area, and other snow in other areas, which made a huge difference. But with that, as we'll probably hear today, and it still surprises me, we are starting to see a drought show up in the northwest corner of the state already. Our friends to the north in Washington are really seeing the effects of a drought. And it just again makes me think, with more and more people, more and more demands, that we really need to be able to understand our water supply to better manage it. And with that, that's all I have to say. Thanks much.
Welcome, Commissioner Carrara. Would you like to give comments?
Sure.
Okay.
I enjoyed the tour yesterday. It was good to see some of the work that I had done as a employee of Bureau of Reclamation and Water Smart Grant Coordinator, see actual stuff getting completed on the ground, the planning and, water measurement automation stuff that we did see yesterday. It seems to be helping a lot of people manage their water better. One of the precepts of water conservation, water management is you have to measure, and the more you measure, the better you measure. The more you understand what you have, and the better you can manage it. When I was here in February, I mentioned, well, it didn't look like we were having a winter. I got home just in time for Ben's Snowmageddon of February, and it was like 3 weeks that I was basically snowed in with nearly 2 feet of snow on the ground. And again, it's also surprising that, yes, that really helped with our water supply. But I still see that Wickiup only filled to, about 70% full, and that really concerns me for our summer water supply. It looked like, oh boy, we got it made, and nope, Mother Nature has different ideas. Other than that, I think that's all I've got to say at the moment.
Thank you. Appreciate that. So I too really appreciated the tour that we had yesterday. I really appreciated the nursery, and I wish more people could hear, was it Mark Krautman? The passion and feeling and the stewardship he felt for the land that he has. And, those of us that make our living off the land, I think that's generally the consensus and a misperception among the public that maybe that's not the case, but really did see that yesterday. I mean, it was a passion for him, to leave it better than what he took it over as. And sustainability is a buzzword kind of in agriculture right now, and certainly he was living the sustainability creed or motto or whatever it might be, that it's improving and going something that can be sustained for generations to come, as far as we can see when you have stewards like that are watching over the land. And Eric's presentation last night talking about that kind of reiterated the importance of that, of tying our cultures and of the past to the the present and ultimately the future, and just really, really good insights. For Eastern Oregon, when in February, kind of like what some of the other commissioners commented, we thought we was looking at a drought. At our last commission meeting, we thought we'd have adequate, and then it's rain, and then we thought, well, okay, we're in really good shape. The Waihe's going to be close to full, the Malheur system's close to full, but we're not going to quite fill. And then in May, we got 2 weeks of record rainfall, and Waihe filled, and we've probably spilled 100,000 acre feet. We've got about an inch going over the rain gate right now, just a little bit, and now we're set for next year. Just incredible blessing to the area, for the economy, for the well-being of the area. The stream flows are running better than they would normally this time of year. Everything's above average. It's just incredible how things can turn around, and the Bureau helped us with flood management and all that, and we got new employees at the Bureau as a lot of the older employees are retired out. But boy, so impressed. I mean, they was right there learning, and the resources they had was just tremendous in helping. We went into a flood situation here in the last 2 weeks, and the Waihe and the Malheur system, that it just doesn't happen that way, that where we was spilling, significant amount of water, and the reservoirs now are topped off, and here it is the 15th of June, and we're at capacity, which bodes really well for next year. But with that comes challenges. When Renee and I came over on Wednesday, the crops were looking good, things are coming along, it was warm, and I'm going to pass a picture I have around here to some of the commissioners. There was a hailstorm that hit an isolated area, and some of our neighbors was totally wiped out, to the point that drip tape was actually ruined. The hail was so severe, and they probably got an inch of rain in 20 minutes along with hail. And these onions were like 8 inches tall, and that's what they look like after. And like I say, we just passed through there, and my son called me and was telling me about all this, and I said, well, I just saw those, and they look. And so that's how, and it was isolated. A few miles down the road, you don't see anything, but those are the kind of risks and challenges that the agriculture world goes through, and so things can happen, things can change, but overall, Eastern Oregon, you look at the predictions and the flows and all that, the coast is where the problem is, and that's usually where we from the east come to get away from drought and dust, and it looks like they're going to have to come our way. When we was going out through Bend and Burns, the hills are green, which for this late in the year and the weather cycles we've been in the last few years, that's unusual, which if we do turn into a hot, dry summer, it may bode for high fire danger again. So there's a lot of issues, a lot of concerns, but at least for irrigated agriculture and those of us that depend on water for our economies, reservoir storage and all that, things look as good as they've looked in a while. And so another thing that happened, and I've talked about it before, was our annual field day where we bring fifth graders from all over the valley, Oregon and Idaho, and we had about 800 this year that attended the Waihe Field Day put on by the Waihe Watershed in conjunction with the Waihe Irrigation District. It's an educational program where they're taught about the aquifers, they're taught about the ecology, they're taught about wildlife. We bring in all the experts, and these kids spend a full day up there, and not only the kids, but their teachers and parents and chaperones learn things about the area that they didn't even know, even though they live there. And so in your own areas, when you, like the tour we had yesterday, there's so much to see that so many have no concept. The only concept of water they have is to turn on the tap, the water runs, everything's good. But to see the process that goes through for all that to happen, from our weather and climate and then down to the clean water, like what Bob and Mike's been involved with their whole professional careers, to bring it to the tap or to bring it to a useful, beneficial use for each of us down to individuals, to have this cup sitting here that we take so for granted is really something that we need to tell our story, whether, as a government agency or as private agencies or whatever we're doing. This field day has just been such a positive thing in our area, where kids from all over the valley come and are instructed and taught and spend that day. And it's kind of one of those things, they'll always remember that field trip they went on, that they got to go in the Waihe Dam, or they got to do these hands-on type things that teaches those things. And so when you have opportunities in your areas to participate in those things, I'd encourage you to do so. So with that, that's all I have. And And I think maybe we'll hear some more from Ken here in a little bit about, boy, things are just all over the board as far as drought and not drought and, abundance and floods and all these things are mixed. I mean, we've got everything in the state this year in a matter of days, it seems like. So with that, Director Byler, we'll turn the time over to you for your report.
Thank you, Vice Chair Korn. And not to give the impression that I have a fragile ego, but I'm going to go first, and then Ken's going to go. And I want to save the best for last, because I know Ken's remarks are always of great interest. But I have a few things I want to get on your radar screen. First of all, with any organization, over time, changes happen and transitions happen, and there are a few that I want to mention. Typically, we don't go through the individuals, but in this case, these are folks that you've interfaced with and and a lot of the folks that we work with regionally and statewide have an interest in. One is the retirement of Mike Ladd, who's the North Central Region Manager. He'd been with the agency for, I think, 30 plus years. I can't remember the exact number, but has just been a real institution for us, a thought leader steeped in history and practice, and just a great teammate to have, wrestling with complicated issues as he has in his career, which was primarily in Northeast Oregon. He, fortunately, is sticking around on a part-time basis, and we are in the recruitment process right now to fill that position for the North Central region. The other departure is Brenda Bateman, who's our administrator who has been our administrator of the Technical Services Division. She, in the last few months, went on a rotation agreement as an assistant director of kind of operations side of things at Business Oregon, which is just the building over here, and which is a great experience for her. And not surprisingly, they want to keep her, and so starting July 1st, she'll be a permanent employee there. We're sorry to see her go. She certainly had a lot to do with, especially in recent years, with some of the kind of emerging areas of focus for the agency. In particular, she had a very significant role in developing the integrated water resources strategy, and that's a very big deal, and has already borne a lot of fruit and generated a lot of conversation that I think is constructive for Oregonians as well as just more specifically with our agency. So we wish her well. Lastly, Brian Noga, who is our desktop and network administrator, sadly accepted a job across the way here at Housing, and that has implications for all of us. He's the guy who helps us with our tablets and the like. So we're sad to see him move on. You heard from Sean Ortiz Turner, who's in the room here today. That's an important individual for you to be aware of, because he's going to help you in the near term while we figure out our long-term solution for Brian's position. So thank you, Sean, for taking on that role. These guys are easy to work with, just so you know. So moving on to some other items, I want to mention the Umatilla. I won't reiterate what's in the report, but I do want to just mention that that's been a long-standing item of discussion periodically with the Commission. You will recall the funding that was authorized 4 years ago or so for a project that's just highly complex to appropriate and mitigate for appropriations out of the main stem Columbia River. That's been a desire for folks within that region, irrigators in particular and others, for many, many years. And we're finally getting to the point where the project is starting to get implemented on the ground. We just got an email this week from some of the leads there saying that they're starting to do the work. So that's really great news, and we're excited to see that progress as we go forward. Just to the east of that neck of the woods is the Walla Walla Basin. I wanted to update you on some of the work there, which I find pretty exciting from the standpoint that there's been a lot of good work that's happened in the Walla Walla for a number of years. The issues there are as thorny as anywhere in terms of having to deal with species issues, listed species, water quality issues, scarcity issues. You all know we've, in recent years, stopped issuing new permits for groundwater. We initiated a serious water management problem area. We're going into, implementing measurement on wells. And that's all really important, but that community is really in a position where they need to dig deep and figure out how they're going to allocate resources to a variety of needs. And one of the things that has been very promising to me is a series of meetings that we've been having between our agency, the Confederated Tribes of the Umatilla Indian Reservation, and State of Washington through Department of Ecology. And those conversations have been valuable from the standpoint that there's a emerging shared interest and expectation that we understand that there is an arbitrary state line that goes through the basin, but the resource doesn't respect that, both surface water and groundwater. And the community of interests, whether it's agriculture, municipal, or ecological needs, there's not enough water to really meet all those needs, and some difficult conversations need to happen. And to do that, we need to think holistically around that basin. And so there's some emerging interest among the three sovereigns around that issue, and our desire is to set up a coordinating team among those entities and begin engaging with the community and figuring out if there's a constructive path forward to help resolve kind of long-term water security issues for that basin. So that's a long path that we're charting for ourselves, but it's an important one, and I'm really excited about it. I want to talk a little bit about the Willamette. You heard and you toured the North Santiam, and you heard in the morning before the tour some context around the reallocation effort that the Corps is engaged in, and the stakes associated with that, and it really is big. We are I think, on the cusp of some more significant implementation work. And one of the things that recently Doug Woodcock, our deputy, testified at a hearing, informational hearing with one of the policy committees of the legislature, and they talked about the reallocation process. And it was one of those smelling salts moments, I think, for the committee, where they realized that, how significant this was for the area where most Oregonians live, and how complicated it's going to be. And there are, just some really complex threshold issues that have to be worked through before we could even get to implementing a lot of the work that, or the reallocation to realize the redistribution of that stored water. And my hope is that we can build on that emerging awareness with legislators, and it's quite possible that we'll need to seek resources both within our agency and Department of Fish and Wildlife for us to be able to move in any meaningful and brisk fashion to work through these implementation issues. So I wanted to put that on your radar screen. Also in the staff report is a piece around the Water Resources Development Program. Very important program for us. It is in many ways I think an outcome associated with the Integrated Water Resources Strategy, although some of its components predate the strategy. Having resources to be able to invest in communities and help them work through planning issues, technical feasibility study needs to help test and understand the viability of project ideas, and then be able to fund projects is is a hugely important tool for us and puts our agency in a position where we're not just the referee and the regulator, but we're also helping communities wrestle with their long-term needs and in a very constructive and productive way. One of the things that two things I want to mention. One is we're engaged internally right now, but soon going to be going out externally on an assessment and review of 2 of those 3 program areas within the WordUp program. One is the feasibility grants, and the second is our water project grants and loans. These are the project dollars that you work and issue grants associated with. They are both important programs, and we'll be having more conversation with you over the course of the coming year as we go through that assessment process. There's a possibility that we could be looking at either rulemaking or legislation associated with any improvements that we identify associated with that assessment work. 2 more things. One in the Klamath. We are, well, I'll start off by saying we haven't had any litigation yet. In the, it is irrigation season, but it's also litigation season, as we say at the Water Resources Department. We haven't seen any litigation yet in the Klamath, which is maybe a little bit early because of the water year we've had, but it also may be an indicator of the trajectory we've tried to set ourselves on with the rulemaking that you did earlier this year. And we're very hopeful that that will be the case so that we can really focus on engaging with the community and looking at how do we build a management system that folks can understand and live with going forward. And we are working with a consultant now to help us calibrate how to engage the community best in this effort. And some interviews are going to be happening with the consultant and local folks next week to help kind of gauge their advice to us in terms of how to build this effort. So that work is ongoing. Also in the Klamath next week, I'll be down in the Klamath for a meeting on the 18th, Tuesday, in my role, my statutory role as director, to serve on the Klamath River Compact Commission. This is a congressionally authorized compact by state, federal governance system associated with the Klamath Basin. It was established many decades ago. The Compact Commission has not met for many years, and this is the first meeting in a long time. It's gathered a little bit of interest, as you can imagine. Folks are curious why we're meeting. I think the meeting itself, the agenda, there are no action items. It's really kind of blowing the dust off of the group, and I don't know that we really know, quite frankly, where we want to go with this at this point. But the group has been active for a long time, and the person who's been the director felt an obligation to activate the group, and so we'll see how the conversation goes. But we've been hearing from a lot of folks in the area, a lot of questions and head scratching about that. So I want you to be aware that that's happening. But again, no actions are slated. It'll be an informational meeting of that group. The last thing I'll mention, then I'll ask Ken to come up, is the water vision, the 100-year vision that we've talked about. That continues to be an area of great interest, as you can imagine. And I think we knew this would happen to a certain extent with the start of the legislative session, the long legislative session. None of us, at least within the state agency arena, really had the bandwidth to focus on it in a meaningful way. So it's been a bit on the back burner in terms of some of the organizational efforts that are needed to help launch this in a more formal way. But there were a lot of conversations that were happening, and I would say that overall there's interest among legislators. There's certainly interest among stakeholders, and that's very gratifying. It's also underscores, though, the intensity of the interests. And one of the things that we wrestled with a little bit this legislative session was the lack of clarity about how things were going to move forward. That raised some concerns from folks and confusion. So the good news is folks are interested, but if we need to really step up and create some more formal process around this, I believe, because the energy that it's generating doesn't know where to go and avoid. And I think that we'll start to see some more clarity around that over the summer months. With the session closing here in the coming weeks, we'll have a chance to re-engage with the governor's office, with our broad stakeholders, and start to put something together that I think will be useful for all of us who have an interest in this to be able to follow. Stepping back on the vision, just as a reminder, the idea behind this is kind of along the lines that Bruce was talking about, how important water is to us all, and how often we lose track of its importance, especially in a water-rich year. One of my favorite sayings, it's not my saying, but is, the first thing the rain washes away is a memory of a drought. And it's it reflects human nature, right? And I think that the big task we have when we recognize that scarcity is an increasing issue in more and more basins across the state, and it's inevitable, frankly, in every basin, and many basins are already wrestling with that. We know that we have complex drivers, water quality issues, we have endangered species issues, we have population growth, we have changing economic needs, we have climate change issues, increasing temperatures. And we have aging infrastructure. The investments that we've made throughout most of our communities were made decades ago, or even longer. We're starting to see we're running greater and greater risk if we don't address those issues, if only just to maintain the existing systems we have. But then what do we want to do in terms of addressing our broader needs? And I think those are very big questions in terms of how the state can play a bigger role as an investor in both built and natural infrastructure as we go forward. That's the core question around the vision. And I think that based on the conversations I've had, based on the interactions I've had with policy makers, I think there's an interest. And if we can harness that going forward, and focus people's energy around this in a positive way, I think that we can start to frame discussions around water and water-related infrastructure on parallel with the conversations that we have on a regular basis around transportation. And if we can do that, then I think that it will become a common area of dialogue for us. And my hope is that we can marshal more significant resources from the state to match federal dollars and other dollars that would come in the door to help communities have the resources to meet their needs. So, all that said, I will be talking more about this as we go forward, and I still have a lot of enthusiasm about the opportunity for this effort. With that, I'll ask Ken to come up and give us the news in terms of the state of affairs.
Thank you. Before we move on to Ken, does any commissioners have any questions of Director Byler? Okay, and one thing too, I would just, for those in the audience, if you have comments, we will be taking comments later. I believe the yellow forms are on the back table, so if you have any comments to make, please fill out the form and bring it forth to Jennifer as you desire to. So, Ken, welcome. Look forward to your report today.
Thank you. Good morning, Commissioners. For the record, my name is Ken Starr. I'm with the Oregon Water Resources Department. I manage the surface water hydrology section. I also chair the Water Supply Availability Committee for the state, and I'm now co-chair of the Drought Readiness Council. Before I kind of launch into my report here, a couple of things. One, I am just the messenger, Commissioner Mull. Don't shoot me, but also don't praise me. I'm just the bearer of news.
Or bad news sometimes.
Yeah, exactly. But a couple of quick kind of news items, I guess. As far as retirements or people moving on, Kathy Dello of the Oregon Climate Service has been kind of an integrated part of our observations of weather and climate patterns for the past number of years I've worked with her. She's accepted a job as state climatologist for North Carolina, and I believe that is effective now. I think she started there June 1st. So we've lost a really good resource as far as insight and practical application of that insight as far as our water supply reporting. Those are some big shoes to fill. So far, there's an interim fill-in as far as the Water Supply Committee and Drought Readiness Council. Dr. Larry O'Neill, who I've never worked with before and haven't met yet, is the interim person that we hope to touch bases with in July. The other point I wanted to mention, I think the last time I spoke with you about the scenic waterways, I think that was in February, the next evaluation is being launched as we speak on the South Umpqua. So that's the next one that's up for study. We'll probably be hearing about that in the very near future. I think they're talking about July to launch sort of a stakeholder committee. I'm stepping outside of my area of expertise here. I'd have to defer to Parks as far as what their plan is moving forward. Couple of other real quick news items. And so, Commissioner Korn, you mentioned the intense rain events in the Oahe. One of those washed out the road to Oahe Dam and actually
That happened 2 days ago, and I didn't mention that, but yes, stranded people up there. They think they maybe got 2 inches of rain down through those canyons in 15, 20 minutes. And yeah, I didn't mention that, but yeah. And that was on top of all these other rains. And that was just real. We didn't get any rain at my house, nor in most of the valley. It kind of went down through the mountains, and those kind of things can happen and just be devastating.
It stranded, I think, one state park.
Yes.
And a youth camp. So they estimated about 150 people were stranded by that. And the other piece, the harmful algal bloom situation that you guys talked about with the city of Salem the other day, that's picking up. So the toxins have been identified in Detroit Lake, although not at levels that are of concern. But it does speak to that. We've learned lessons, so to speak, and they're monitoring and have a mitigated sort of a process to start once it does reach those levels. I just heard that yesterday. So let's start discussing conditions. Usually I have a contest when I do these presentations and see if somebody can identify what the picture is. But this would be cheating in this one, because I think there's at least one commissioner that knows exactly what this picture is.
Jeff blows on the Oahe.
Yeah. So this picture was taken in 2011, and I have to explain that this is not a leak. That's on purpose, the spraying water out front. So we usually lead with discussion of snowpack. This time of year, we're less and less dependent on what we're seeing, because by now snowpack is a foregone conclusion. But we do summarize what we saw during the season, and I think we've already heard some comments about the intensity of this winter, where it didn't occur until literally mid-February. It happened in a short period of time, and there was a lot of it all at once. And that's kind of what punctuated even our precip this winter. So we waited, we had a ton of it, and then it went away by mid-April. The graphic here just kind of helps to underscore that, and in general, we had adequate to above adequate snow supply in the eastern part of the state, and then we never did quite hit normal as far as the northern part of the Cascades. The Willamette, as you can see, just crested above normal for a short period of time and then rapidly fell below. So this plot is, again, just a thumbnail on kind of what happened throughout the season. We'll transition really quick to precipitation. Similar story. So the eastern part of the state, especially the southeastern part of the state, has been receiving adequate precipitation throughout the season. But the northwest corner is the part that seems to be something that we kind of weren't paying attention to until the past couple of months. It appears as though we've got some alarming trends going on. Recent temperatures kind of underscore that same concern, where temperatures in the southeast have been rather mild to normal throughout the central part of Oregon, but the temperatures in the northwest down through the Willamette Valley have been above normal for the past month or so.
And higher than we was in the east, which is really unusual. Usually we're 5 to 7 degrees higher, and when we came over 2 days ago, it's just the reverse.
Yep, and your comments earlier too, while tongue-in-cheek, it's really interesting how this is developing. So it's as though we're going to have to go to Lake Oahe for the beach. So the short-term outlook is for this warm and dry trend that we're seeing this past couple of weeks. But that'll happen, and when you're looking at a 2-week outlook, that's not of terrible concern. What troubles me is the long-term outlook for the coming season is for that same pattern. Definitely strong signal of warmer than normal. And then kind of the jury's out as far as precipitation. So equal chances of above or below normal precip, which I kind of hate. It's sort of like wait and see. But there is a stronger signal for slightly higher than normal chances of precip in the southeast corner. So Oahe may stay full. Okay, jump forward to the seasonal water supply forecasts. The blue icons that you can see there on that map, those are a good thing to see. But you can see up in the northwest corner of the state, some of the seasonal supply outlooks are for, in some cases, less than 70%. And in talking with my counterpart from Washington State yesterday, he underscored their process for drought declaration. And as you just mentioned, there is a drought declaration right across the river in the state of Washington. Their threshold is 75% projected water supply forecast, along with demonstrated hardship. So if we were Washington, we would be likely declaring a drought in the northwest corner of the state. However, I want to underscore, we're not Washington, and that's not how we declare droughts. But the conditions are similar in, I'd say, Tillamook, Clatsop, and parts of Columbia County as we speak. And then the next two plots, I really did those just to kind of compare and contrast. So remember April, we had some huge rain events. We had localized flooding in this area. We had flooding in the north central region of the state. We had some extremely high flows in places. Fast forward to May, and you can see the pattern developed really quickly. And the current conditions are somewhat similar. And you can see, I pointed out Clatsop County, for example. Stream flow for the month in Clatsop County, at least at one data point, was 42% of normal. So we went from real quick, in the 80%, 70% of normal, down to 42% of normal in less than a month. The next plot is just designed to kind of compare the patterns that we're seeing in the Northwest. So Western Washington has a similar pattern set up, where the eastern part of their state is somewhat adequate, but the western part, and especially of note, is that their rainforest is actually experiencing a drought. So in the Olympic Peninsula, you can see the little red dots. Yeah, those are historically low flows. And there have been a couple of articles recently about how ironic it is to see a drought in a rainforest. Alaska, the peninsula of Alaska is experiencing a similar situation. A couple of real quick plots of stream flow throughout the state, and I really just kind of showed a really good one compared to a really bad one. But the really good one, Catherine Creek near Union, of course, is in the northeast corner of the state, and you can see that flows are still well above average. And I kind of, my favorite comparison is 2015, because we all kind of remember how low things were pretty much statewide in 2015, well above those levels. But I do want to point to the fact that the line, the red line, is quite down. So I'm hoping that that trend doesn't continue and that it kind of normals out a little bit, but it is cause for concern moving forward, especially with warmer than normal conditions, which will increase demand. We'll jump to the Willamette Valley now, and you can see that Thomas Creek, while not a significant supply, it is a significant indicator of conditions. It's a gauge with a long period of record. They're at, I'd say, historic lows, but not quite as low as it was in 2015. And we're seeing this, as you saw in the plots before, we're seeing this in places like the North Coast, like the Mid-Coast. The Siletz River right now is at almost historic lows as we speak. And then the rains that we saw here a week or so ago, I was hoping that those would help bump things up a little bit, but the bump was short, and it's pretty much gone already.
Ken, what we're seeing on the west side, how much of that do you attribute to the, just this year versus more kind of cumulative impacts?
I'm going to editorialize just a little bit. I think we are paying for short years in the past. So, but we also and I can say that with a little more confidence as far as what we're seeing on the west slopes of the Cascades. But what I'm seeing coming off of the Coast Range and some of the coastal streams, I'm a little less confident in that statement. I'd like to think that there is a fair amount of soil carryover and storage from previous years, but it's a little more reactive to current weather patterns than you would see in the Cascades. So again, harken back to kind of the events that we've seen this year. We've seen some really balmy, unseasonable fall weather clear through the winter, and then it started with a boom. Winter came in mid-February, and then went away again in April. So that's what I mean by these. We're seeing the volume come in a shorter period of time. So intense and short events, and that's where we're paying for it as far as this. We've hit base flow. We're seeing flows now that we should see in late July. In the coast. The next plot, I use this a lot in the biweekly report, but it underscores sort of what the authors with the U.S. Drought Monitor are seeing, and it's a frequent example that I use when I communicate with them as far as current conditions in soil moisture. And this particular plot is total moisture percentile, which takes into effect any snow water equivalent that may be present at the time, and of course, like I said earlier, we don't really have much of that right now. But it underscores the dire situation in the Olympic Peninsula, along with this creeping, situation that we're seeing. And I did blame Washington. I told them that it was their fault that we were having, bad conditions. But you can see the deficit in soil moisture in the North Coast creeping down to the mid-coast almost, and well into the Willamette Valley. And so conversely, you can see the pattern that's being shown in the U.S. Drought Monitor as well. We kind of can see that back in May, we had some drier than normal situations, but as of last week and as of yesterday, you can see that we've got areas of D1 or moderate drought now in the North Coast area of the state. The following pages really just underscore discussions that were mentioned earlier this morning, that in many places our storage projects reached capacity. In a few we didn't, which is good news. And it was also interesting that when things were getting close, the Bureau had to change hats really quick and go into flood control. And it was a real challenge, and especially during a few events that we had there in April. That said, though, if you access water from a storage project this year, things look pretty good, with the exception of course, some of the Deschutes reservoirs where the supply didn't quite catch up. However, what was kind of interesting this year was that the Crooked River side, or the Ochoco side, they actually filled. For example, Prineville filled, and that's kind of an unusual situation here for the past 10 years, I'd say. So I won't really get into point-by-point discussion as far as reservoirs go. That stuff is available in real time. But I do want to kind of point out that the Willamette didn't fill in most cases. So it'll be an interesting season as far as flow augmentation goes for the Willamette. The system itself, and I wish I had printed this out a little bit bigger for my sake, because I can't really read this. But I think the Willamette system right now is right about 80% of capacity, which isn't a horrible, number, but it is also 22% behind where it should be for this time of year. So that's telling me that it should say 100. So with that, I think, my kind of in closing is that it's becoming obvious that supply should be somewhat adequate east of the Cascades, but it's going to be a little bit of a challenge on the west side, which is a real contrast in kind of like what we've seen in the past. Now, will it be inadequate? I can't say, but I do think that it will be an active distribution season. With that, thank you for your time, and happy to entertain any questions.
Any questions?
I have one question. Back to the drought declaration in Washington and the statement, "We're not Washington." Can you just briefly explain the difference between how Washington and Oregon decide and maybe what's behind those differences?
Yeah, Commissioner Mull, I can try. I'll try not to step outside of my area of expertise. So they're much more prescriptive. Their declaration process is I'll say well lined out. They actually wish that they were more like us, but a lot of people do. Like I said, the conditions, they rely heavily on water supply reports, and when conditions fall below 75%, that is one of their mandatory triggers. But the other one that I find that's kind of interesting and somewhat subjective is that they also have to show duress. So in that 75% is all fine and well, but if 75% doesn't cause undue hardship, then the automatic drought declaration doesn't engage. So if a community shows that they're under duress and the projected supply is 75% or less, then that's an automatic declaration. So here in Oregon, we could have a situation where the water supply is 10%. But if that doesn't cause a problem, we would still evaluate it, but maybe not submit that to the governor for consideration for a drought declaration. On the other hand, we could have a situation where the supply might be 80%, but a community can't get by on 80%, and they would lobby the Water Supply Group and the Drought Readiness Council. If there's a compelling reason to submit that to the governor, we can do so. And I think that's why Washington wishes there was a little bit more flexibility and less of a statutory requirement for the drought declaration.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
Any further questions? Is there any regulation going on in Klamath yet, or any?
Yes, yes.
Just curious about that. So, thank you, Ken, for your report. We always appreciate it. It's very informative and really, really good, really timely. Okay, this time we're to agenda item E, allocation of place-based integrated water resource planning funding. And so, Kim Harmony, okay.
Good morning. For the record, my name is Harmony Burright, and my phone is ringing. I apologize for that. I'm a planning coordinator with the Water Resources Department.
And for the record, I'm Kim Fritz Ogren, manager of the Water Resources Development Program.
And last you saw me, I was about to burst and short of breath, and yeah, things have changed. I'd also kind of left the fate of place-based planning in the hands of many, and it looks like things are going pretty well, so we're excited to update you on just kind of where things are at and what we're thinking in terms of if and when funds are allocated to us to support place-based planning and what we're thinking about there. So this is essentially what we're going to talk to you about. It's basically just what we're expecting to come through from the legislature, realizing that anything can change at any time when it comes to the legislature, and basically seek your input on our plan for kind of allocating those funds to our groups to continue to support their efforts.
And I'll note that the reason we're coming today early and seeking input as opposed to our normal process of seeking sort of approval of a recommendation is the planning groups have requested that if funds are allocated by the legislature that they be able to quickly access those so that they can continue planning at the rate they are and they don't have that sort of gap where they're without funds to continue their work.
So by now you should be fairly familiar with some of the background about place-based planning, but we'd like to just kind of briefly walk you through it. So place-based planning was a recommended action that came out of the Integrated Water Resources Strategy. We are now, the groups have been planning for a little over 3 years now. They've been following the draft guidelines created in 2015 that lay out the 5 planning steps. And both the authorization for the funding and the provision of technical services, technical assistance were laid out in Senate Bill 266, which also laid out some of the key principles for the planning process, which the groups have also been following. Place-based planning is a part of our Water Resources Development Program, which is kind of a forward-looking incentives program that looks to help communities really understand and prepare for their water future, connecting them to financial and technical resources, from kind of concept to implementation of these multi-benefit projects that yield social, economic, and environmental benefits. As you're aware, we funded 4 places. The Mid-Coast region, Lower John Day Subbasin, Upper Grand Ronde Subbasin, and the Harney Basin. You'll note that the Harney had in the past been the whole Malheur Lake administrative area, but as a decision of the group was to kind of focus more in on the Harney Basin, which is the area that's also the subject of our groundwater study out there. And also as a reminder, 2 of the places, the Mid-Coast and Harney, received partial funding, and Lower John Day and Upper Grand Ronde received full funding. And what we mean by that is the full funding is they received the full amount that was requested. Mid-Coast and Harney received part of what was requested, but none of us really at that time fully knew what we were getting into or what it would take to complete the planning process. So in November, we came to you and talked a bit about, and we try to do that on an annual basis, just what we're learning, what we're seeing, what some of the kind of needs and challenges are from the group, as well as some of the successes that we're seeing. And one of the clear takeaways, and it's, I think, been kind of clear, maybe even from early on, is that if we're going to spend the time to really build the relationships and the trust necessary to carry out some of this work, it's going to require a bit more time and also funding to accomplish in the way that I think was envisioned in the IWRS, the guidelines, and Senate Bill 266. And so, given that, there was a request made to include a $750,000 ask in the agency request budget that was picked up by the governor's recommended budget, as well as a desire to extend place-based planning to 2023. And that kind of brings us today. A lot has happened since November, but things are generally a good outlook, that there will be some support for the place-based planning groups, although we're not, right now the amount is maybe going to be less than $750,000, but we're incredibly grateful that there will be any funding, hopefully, to continue to support the places.
Yes, Harmony mentioned a lot has happened since November. A lot has happened in the weeks since we drafted this staff report and put together this presentation, and we don't want to steal Raquel's thunder when she gives the legislative and budget update. But things have changed a little bit. We're still going to present on what we've talked with the planning groups about allocating if $750,000 were awarded, and have a plan for if a lesser dollar amount is authorized, which seems likely at this point. So back when we were developing the agency request budget, we worked with the planning groups to talk with them about what funding they thought they needed to finish out the planning process. And in those conversations, it made sense that the Harney and Mid-Coast groups who received partial funding and were taking a little longer to go through the planning process, they had greater needs. And the Lower John Day and Upper Grand Ronde were thinking that with the funds that had been awarded, that they likely would be able to get to a plan that the group could adopt, but they were concerned about being able to stay together and continue to work together to implement that plan. And that's actually part of planning step 5. You adopt and then implement your plan. It's not something to sit on a shelf. So in working with the planning groups, we talked about and intend to award $200,000 to Harney and Mid-Coast to help them finish developing their plans. And then $100,000 to Lower John Day and Upper Grand Ronde to help with the coordination of the implementation of their plan. And then we've also heard from stakeholders and have observed on our own the need for an evaluation of this pilot phase in order to determine how best to move forward with place-based planning, or even think about other planning that the state could help communities do as they prepare for their water future. We've also found that the ability to gather all of the groups together so they can talk with one another and learn from one another is really valuable. And so in that $750,000 ask, we had slated for $150,000 to be available for sort of larger multi-group support through the convener gatherings and trainings, and then some smaller portion of that for an evaluation of place-based planning.
And one thing, when we update you later in the year, you'll learn more about, and we kind of alluded to it at the last update, was this learning partnership that we're doing with the 4 places, bringing them to each other's places to observe each other's processes and learn from each other. That's something that's been generously supported by the Ford Family Foundation, but that's, their learning partnerships generally last about a year. All of our places have told us that that's incredibly valuable to them, but those are the types of things we'd like to figure out how to support going forward. So that's just an example of another thing that's in that last little box there.
So with that, here's just a table then of the total amount that would be awarded that I'll walk you through, because there's a bunch of numbers there. So back in winter, I think December of 2015, each of the 4 groups and 12 others submitted applications to embark on place-based planning, and they gave us sort of what they thought was the best estimate of what planning would take. And so for these 4 groups, the dollar amounts ranged from $190,000 to $330,000. As Harmony mentioned, we've learned since then that this form of integrated water resources planning, it just takes more money than that. To date, we have worked with each of the planning groups to give them what we could of the initial $750,000 authorized by the legislature. And so the Lower John Day and Upper Grand Run were fully funded, and then the commission authorized an additional $10,000 for each, and the Midcoast and Harney basins were partially funded and then given another $15,000 after that. So with the additional anticipated awards, the funding would end up at Upper Grand Run receiving $307,000, Lower John Day $300,000, and then the Midcoast and Harney $350,000 for a total of about $1.3 million. So that's the anticipated allocation. We continue to work with the planning groups, and will do so if the funds are authorized by the legislature. We'll quickly work to either amend or set up new grant agreements so they can access these funds. If less than $750,000 is authorized, which seems likely given that currently only $550,000 is included in our budget, we're going to reach back out to the planning groups, once again ask them what they need in order to come up with a way to equitably allocate the funding to help them out. So that's what we have talked with the planning groups about for several months, and they seem to be good with. But we also wanted to see if you had any feedback or questions before we move forward as the legislative session draws to a close.
So, great, I can't hear myself.
There you go.
So, great job. And again, can you go back to the first slide, shows the map of the...
This one or the other one?
The one that shows the overview map of the...
4 places.
The basins.
4 places.
Oh, the map.
Yeah. Yeah, so first of all, great job through the legislative process to secure money, and I think this is a testimony that we're starting to see at the state level, so the level of support for the place-based planning, or planning in general, if you will. So I'm really excited to see that we're going to be able to complete the work that we've started, because certainly, as I said earlier, it's the relationships that are being built are amazing, right? At least the few that I've been involved with. It just really is far beyond what I thought we'd be able to do, and so it's so important to continue. But I wanted to bring this map up again, just to kind of emphasize my point this morning, is this is just touching the surface. If you look at all the areas out there, we talked about the Willamette, that's our future, I think, place-based planning, to really integrate and create those relationships. But I'm really happy to see we're going to complete the 4 for that, because this is a pilot program that I think really needs to take off. So a great job on your work. I hear great feedback from the program, so I'm really pleased to see us going there. I just want to keep emphasizing the future, because this is really how we're going to solve the bigger issues down the road. So thank you. I wanted to ask you how you're going to reallocate, but I like that you said you're going to work with the group, so thank you.
Yeah, and I think one benefit of the learning partnership that we've been doing with the groups is that they really have a better understanding of each other's needs and interests. And I really think that we're at a place where we can all sit down together and come up with an equitable distribution, which I really appreciate about the groups as well.
And I think it's more than that. I think people come in with a perception of how they want to solve an issue, and when they have this relationship-based solution, they make changes, and that works for everyone. And that's what's so amazing and powerful about this, is everyone's really kind of understanding each other's perspective and needs. And I mean, it's a testimony to the planning process in this particular initiative we have. So,
thank you.
Raquel's not here. I see. Do you have any read of, the next couple of weeks, we're obviously going to know what the funding level is. No indication of where that's going at all at this point, or?
Vice Chair Corn, I believe last I heard that our budget had passed the House floor and is going to the Senate. I think it was rescheduled. It was supposed to be yesterday, but it's now Monday. And in that budget, $550,000 was authorized for the department and the planning groups to use to finish out this pilot phase.
Just to add to that, so chances are we're looking at $550,000, as Kim just noted. That's what's in the budget that's moving through the system right now. The caveat is that at the very end of the legislative session, they have what they call the Christmas tree bill, where they might make adds or even subtractions, depending on the deals that are cut at the end of the session. So there's a possibility that some additional resources could appear in that bill. But I don't know what the odds are of that.
Did any of the commissioners have any questions?
Good morning.
Morning.
You mentioned in the discussion the planning documents were not something that we just wanted to sit on the shelf, that we wanted them to actually generate some outcomes or activities. And I'm wondering, mostly out of curiosity at this stage, if you can give us any information about how well we're progressing on the plans, and are the plans starting to envision some of the actions that are going to follow?
Definitely. So each group is kind of at a different stage, and they're all approaching it a little bit differently. Upper Grand Ronde is probably the most likely to finish a plan first. They are currently in step 4, developing integrated solutions after successfully finishing up step 2 and step 3. Lower John Day is almost complete with step 3 and will launch into step 4, but they're really thinking more deeply about kind of community engagement and how to get more people involved at this phase. Midcoast is struggling through step 3, and that was part of, the budget woes, was just needing to kind of slow the pace of the group to kind of be commensurate with the resources. But they're taking kind of a learning and action approach out there, so they're kind of they're finding kind of incremental things that they can find consensus on to move forward with. So, or just supporting things that they know are widely supported in the group. Conservation is a really, really big key issue out there, and the municipalities, because of a lot of what they've been hearing through partners, are kind of showing leadership and trying to figure out how they can step up. Kind of taking a model of some of the other areas like the Joint Water Commission, Clackamas Water Providers. So just how can they be more coordinated? That's kind of like it's not a direct, it's not in a plan, but it's a result of them working together. And I think the broader group sees that kind of momentum being built, and it really builds a lot of trust in the process. The Harney group is kind of trying to wrap up steps 2 and 3, while also launching into step 4. They had a 2-day-long solution summit where they had a whole bunch of people, well, really anyone was welcome to draft a 1-page, using a template, a 1-page description of potential solutions, and then the whole group kind of sat down and thought through those together. And we're still, it's the solutions phase is challenging because there's just a lot of spaghetti thrown against the wall, and this kind of question of like, how do we kind of methodically move through these and assess them and determine collectively what goes in a plan. And Steve was able to attend that Solution Summit on behalf of the department. The Harney group, also recognizing the urgency and immediacy of the groundwater issues, they have sought consensus on some recommended actions and are beginning to move forward with some of those. So an example of that is everything from information gathering. So they sought consensus to go for an OWEB grant to do a community-wide survey on groundwater impacts to domestic well users. And they're now in the process of designing that survey, which will feed into the planning process and probably feed into really any groundwater actions we take out there, which is great. And then also looking at, they pulled together with OWEB a technical team to start looking at developing a proposal for the Conservation Reserve Enhancement Program to look at essentially voluntary voluntary cancellation, but also voluntary, I don't know what the word is, not using your water for 15 years, whatever the word for that is. So we're in the process of kind of exploring that. So there are little things coming out of the process already, but a lot of them are really trying to look holistically at step 4 at the same time. Sorry, that was a long answer.
No, that was a great answer. Thank you.
Any further questions? Any other questions?
One comment and a question. Just for clarity's sake, as a representative of Mackenzie River Trust, my employer. I participated in the last meeting on Midcoast, and the Mackenzie River Trust formally signed on as a partner to that, so I'll be attentive to any potential conflicts of interest or perceptions that may cause going forward. The Mackenzie River Trust may be in a position to help municipalities or others with land transactions that might secure uplands for water supply, that sort of thing. That's our interest. And I want to commend you on certainly the whole thing, but particularly given the legislative session and some of the agenda, the legislation being pursued, and long-standing, particularly on the coast, concern over the use of herbicides, particularly aerially applied herbicides in forestry. There was a point in the meeting, several points in the meeting, where statements were made by people often with a perhaps environmental conservation sort of mindset that sort of cast aspersions on that generally. And there was a very defensive response from representatives of the forest industry that were there. And it got pretty heated pretty quick. And I commend you on handling that well and just diplomatically. It didn't escalate to the point where defuse is the right word, but I think it could have, and I think you did an excellent job of that, and that's not easy to do in a public forum, so thank you for that. But it does raise a question for me, based on my experience in this world as well, is how resilient, how robust do you feel like these partnerships are at this point? How vulnerable to some heel in the sand, spur of the moment, off the cuff comments that people could get pissed off and walk away?
Very. I think that's kind of just the reality of a collaborative process and a public process. I think the challenge we face is not shying away from the conflict, but trying to engage it and trying to bring people together to try to understand. Also helping people understand the different avenues for change, that some people may not feel that a collaborative process is the right avenue for them to change the thing they want to change, but it is a powerful avenue to change a lot of things. And so helping them really understand what that process is about, what it's for, how they can fit in that process, and then when there are conflicts, and the Midcoast, there are many, have been many, will be many, it's just acknowledging that that is there, and then helping us work through, like, how do we confront that in a way that, like, is respectful to everyone who's a part of the process. And it's not, not talking about it. It's just making sure that people are, doing it in a way that is respectful, that it follows our charter, and if they can't, then maybe the process is not a good fit for them. We certainly, want people with different perspectives and opinions to be involved, but they have to play by the same rules as everybody else, and sometimes that's really challenging for people. They really want to see something happen immediately, but I think what draws them to the collaborative is they can see the power of a collaborative process. They can see the power that could potentially come out of a collaborative process, and they kind of want to circumvent the whole building a relationship thing and building support and building consensus to just have the power towards a particular end. And that's just, like, that's what we have to protect the integrity of the process, so that when something comes out of it, like, it is the spirit and the will of the group actually standing behind it. It's not just something that someone has co-opted kind of for their agenda. But that's true of everybody at the table. But it's definitely, and I think we might see in the plans that there aren't some of the visionary things we maybe want to see, or some of the, like, they might not, tackle all of the conflicts, because we have to focus on the things that we do have consensus on, and that might be, kind of watered down versions of things that people want to see, which I don't think detracts from its value necessarily. For some people, they will see that it detracts from its value, but I think it's just, it would be interesting to see what actually comes through consensus of a very, ultimately, some of these at least in Midcoast, there are lots of fractures. And so what can they actually bring to consensus?
So can I just ask for a little clarity? You said very, did you mean very robust and resilient or very vulnerable?
Both. I think, yeah. I think that risk is always there, and it's really like, but I think we have the right people involved. It's that when times are hard and your feelings get hurt, do you come back to the table and try to work it out? And I think we have a lot of people there who will come back to the table and try to work it out. And there are some people who won't. And my hope is that they don't just stand on the sidelines and throw rocks at us.
Great. I would encourage all commissioners, given the opportunity, to attend at least one of the meetings. I think it gives real insight into something that Commissioner Korn commented on yesterday and again today about agriculture and how much is going on that people simply aren't aware of. And it's just a great window into a lot of that.
Thanks for being there.
Thanks again.
It was great to see you there.
I've attended a couple of the Harney meetings too, and I just think staff is doing a great job of a mix of being there, but good local, at least at Harney, you got great local people that are really, really helping carry the torch, and you guys are complementing, not adversarial, and that's really, really important. And I just think a lot of progress is being happening. On the tour yesterday when we was meeting those, I just kept thinking, here's the next ideal place. I mean, we met with some key people that could be leaders in that process of place-based planning if we could get funding, and it seems to me like that's a logical next place to go with a place-based planning effort, to formalize it, to give them some funds, and you already got the people, and I'm sure there's more. And of course, Willamette is so complex and all that, and so large, maybe there's going to have to be sub-basin, subcommittee type things to make it so, I mean, if you get it too big, it's just unmanageable after a while. But we met some people yesterday that could just fit right in the bill of what we're talking about, and we've seen the reports from Midcoast and, well, all four of the groups, but Midcoast and Harney, it seems like we've heard a lot from them and seen a lot of, developed some relationships with them as we've interacted with them and all that, the key people locally really makes your job easier. So when you get those things that could potentially spin out of control, that you're not left hanging out there by yourself as the state agency, those local leaders can take charge and help and diffuse those situations many times where it might inflame it more if you guys are the only ones hung out there by yourselves. So really good things. Any other comments or questions for?
Okay. I would only note that I think it's a great investment in developing these transformative relationships that you mentioned, Joe, because it takes time to build those, and if you're going to expect people to be continuing to come to the table and talk, you have to first set a strong foundation. So I'm encouraged by your discussion.
If I might also add, I think one of the powers of collaborative processes isn't that they magically make conflict disappear or quickly resolve it. They build the capacity of a place to handle that change and to work through those conflicts. And that trajectory is not a linear path. It is up and down. And the thing that I have been most impressed with in the state's efforts with this is we're willing to work through those ups and downs with communities and really stick together in a partnership to see those things through.
Keep buying that Dramamine.
Yeah, right?
Thank you both for your report and your efforts. So if there's no other questions or comments, then I guess we'll go ahead and move to our next agenda item, if that's okay. Strategic planning implementation. Agenda item F, Director Byler.
Thank you, Vice Chair Korn. So I want to provide a kind of brief update on the strategic plan, and maybe I'll start by reorienting us all around the strategic plan, kind of where it fits with who we are and what we do. You all know that we have a set of statutes and rules that govern our activities. They create numerous programs, all generally built around the notion of water management, the use of water. We've had a long-standing mission statement that orients us around managing the resource in a way that can balance in-stream and out-of-stream needs. We also have the Integrated Water Resources Strategy, which is a significant document for the state of Oregon and for Oregonians, which for, I think, the first time really pulls together the broad array of water-related interests and issues and attempts to help the reader connect those where appropriate, and also just get a sense of the breadth and scale of water issues, whether they're water use and water management, water supply issues that are under our umbrella, or water quality issues, ecological issues, the nexus with energy, land use, et cetera. That Integrated Water Resources Strategy has numerous recommendations associated with it, all of which are pretty big by themselves and not just related to our agency. In that context, as we adopted the second Integrated Water Resources Strategy, I think in 2017, we started to engage around strategic planning, and the purpose of the plan is not to be that high-level document, but more to help orient our activities as an agency, specific to us as an agency, and in the context of our statutes, rules, and the IWRS. And so that was the effort that we underwent last year, culminating in a strategic plan that was adopted in November of 2018. We then went into implementation mode, and so I want to update you on some of the implementation efforts that we have. The big caveat, of course, which is a caveat virtually on everything that we do in the odd-numbered years between January and June, is the legislative session creates this real massive workload issue for us that it really can affect all aspects of our agency, depending on the issues that are in front of us, but certainly has a big impact on the director's office and a lot of our programs and management team. That said, after the adoption of the strategic plan, we embarked on some efforts to do some initial implementation. And I want to talk about the 4 projects that we have, but I also want to remind you of the kind of the 3 broad priority areas that were identified in the strategic plan that are guiding how we prioritize our workload within the agency. And the shorthand, they're listed in the first page of the staff report. The shorthand that I use when I think about these is, one is modernization. We want to have an ethic and an eye towards modernization of what we do, and that can really take place in a lot of different ways. It could be, looking at our processes and our protocols within the agency. It could be looking at moving towards digitization of some of the tools that we have, internet-related work. It could be moving towards online applications for permits and other water transactions. Those are all kind of aspirational things, but kind of recognizing there's a wide range of things that we can do under the rubric of modernization. So that's one. Second is around working towards securing the water future for the communities that we work with. And that's also massive and very big. You can fit a lot within that as well. Certainly, to me, and I think a lot about the Water Resources Development Program and the assets that brings forward to help communities wrestle with these complex issues, to help support planning efforts, to help support technical studies or project implementation funds. But we also have a lot of technical data-related work that we do within the agency that helps inform those conversations and those questions that the communities wrestle with. And of course, from a management standpoint, those future questions and concerns are going to impact and relate to how we manage the resource on a day-to-day basis. The third area is of equal importance in my mind, for sure, and that is more of an internal focus on the team. How do we operate? How are we getting? Do our staff and our folks consider? They understand how they fit within the broader context of the agency and their responsibilities within their program and how it fits within the broader picture. Are we providing the types of training and tools that will help them excel at their work? Are we communicating with each other as effectively as we can, both internally and externally? Those are the kind of the big overarching questions within that arena that we're using to help shape how we move forward. So with that in mind, I want to talk about the four projects that we've launched, and again, we're not as far along as I would have liked, but a lot of it has to do with the distraction of the legislative session. The first one has to do with our core values, and you may remember our core values of being forward-looking, integrity, service, teamwork, and technical excellence are the values that we have adopted in conjunction with a pretty extensive process that we went through with staff. This was generated as a team, really, and we had a really great committee of staff that helped us, but we reached out to the four corners of the agency to get feedback, and it was a really interesting exercise. There's a lot of great core values out there. I can tell you that it'd be easy to have 20 of them. We wanted to, though, have something that was a little more manageable, and these were the ones that resonated with us ultimately. And they're ones that we want to, and this is the project area, is to start to really build awareness and understanding of what these core values mean within our staff workplace. And so we have a sponsor, project lead, a team of staff who are working on this issue, and this is going to be some continued work on integrating these values into our day-to-day functions on a more regular basis. Second project deals with, and this is a small but meaningful step towards modernization, in my view, is accepting credit cards at the front desk. We're woefully behind in terms of our ability to be able to engage in transactions that I think the average member of the public expects today. So this is a small step in that direction. As I mentioned earlier, I think the bigger picture, and we'll have to work incrementally to get there, is to start moving towards having some of our systems, which now require, for example, with our water transactions, we receive paper applications. Moving towards modernizing those systems so that they can be done online, I think would be a great thing. We don't have the ability or capacity to be able to do that today, but that's something I think that we want to build towards, and I see this as kind of a smaller step towards that longer vision. Similarly, the third project is also using technology to help communicate better on the work in the interface that we have with the customers that we serve. And this project is really around creating some automatic email status updates to applicants who may have been waiting for input and maybe even losing track of the process. And so it's a way for us to be able to easily alert those applicants to where they are at in the process and remind them of the contacts within the programs that if they have questions that they can reach out to. This is really, the impetus for this is to try to avoid having long gaps in between actions with our applicants. I think that can create a lot of confusion, certainly can create concern if that happens from the applicant's standpoint. So we're trying to provide some, keep the ball in the air with them in a way that becomes automatic for us going forward. The fourth project is the one that is less defined, in large part because I'm the project sponsor for that, and I think it's suffered from a little bit of lack of attention on my part. Not that I don't care about it, it's just I've been distracted with the session. I think this is the one I'm most excited about, frankly, and it is incredibly important, I think, for our organization, and it's evolved a little bit in my thought process. And I'll do my best to give you a sense of how I'm thinking about it now, but if you'll forgive me that it may evolve a little bit more before it's fully formulated. One of the things that I think about a lot with our agency, and I imagine almost everyone thinks about this with any organization you've ever been associated with, is there's always seems to be more to do than you have time and capacity to do, to carry those things out. That's certainly the case with state government, and I think it's certainly the case within the natural resources agency sector. We have limited resources to carry out our work. We've got a significant volume of programs. We've got a lot of expectations and interest in having us do different things in different areas of the state. We can only do so much. And I think one of my interests with our agency is to help us carry out as much work as we can with the resources we have in any given time. We're always going to be open to asking for more resources if folks ask for us to do more than we're doing today, or more than we're capable of doing. The Willamette reallocation is a great example of where our existing staff have a lot on their plates today. If there's an interest in us to be able to really wrestle with these complex issues in the Willamette Basin, we're going to need some help to do that. So we're always going to be stepping up and asking for those resources where it's warranted. That said, I think it's a responsibility that we have as managers of agencies to also make sure that while we're asking for those additional resources, we are very disciplined in focusing on carrying out our functions with our existing staff as efficiently and effectively as possible. And so philosophically, that's where I'm coming from, and one of as I've dug in on that and talked about that with staff, the recognition that I have is that we have work to do within our agency to build tools and practices that will help us be more effective as a team. And these aren't programs, these aren't new shiny objects, these are real basic, fundamental, we're tearing this down to the studs and looking at how we manage projects, how we, protocols for communication, where policies for our day-to-day activities need to be updated. How we prioritize our work, which is a portfolio management issue that you see here in the staff report. How we function on a day-to-day basis is an area where I think we have a lot of room to improve. And so we're going to be focusing a lot on those tools, those skills, those practices that I think they're not the shiny object, they're not the sexy new thing out there, but they are going to, if we do this well, and it's going to take time because there's a lot to do, if we do well, I think everyone who works with us will see benefits. It will help us in all aspects of our programs and all of our responsibilities. I think my hope is that our staff will feel that they've got more clarity in terms of where they fit within the agency and how they go about their business, because we'll have more clarity in terms of the expectations and tools that we will be building for them to help them carry out their work. So there's a wide range of things, and now that the session's winding up, I'm putting more energy into this, and the what's kind of the next step for us is to start to wrestle with the universe that we need to do, and then think about incrementally how do we, what comes first and what do we start rolling out. I'm excited about it in a very nerdy kind of way, but I think that this is one of the most important things that we could be doing as an agency, and it's sometimes difficult to do because it's not something that the folks externally see, but again, as I mentioned, I think that it will be something that they will see if we put our shoulder to the wheel and work on this over time. I think there'll be some benefits. So with that, I think that kind of covers the bases on that. If you have any questions, I'd be happy to.
Questions?
I do.
Okay. Good.
Question, comment. Thanks for the update. Eric, I don't want to steal the thunder if you were going to bring this to the table, but back in May, you and I had a text exchange about a New York Times article. You remember that one? Do you mind if I bring that up now? It was funny that early in the morning I'd read this New York Times article that was entitled, this is May 21st, the title was, "They grow the nation's food, but they can't drink the water." And it was a deep dive into the agricultural field workers in the Big Basin in California, and just decades of intensive irrigation and application of agricultural materials and things that over decades and decades had entered the groundwater, and some of the people living there being impacted by that. And I mean, within 5 minutes of me finishing reading this over coffee, I get a text from Eric, and all it is that article. And they said, yeah, we need to think of this in terms of the 100-year vision. That the 100-year vision is to get out ahead of these things that end up biting us, and how difficult it is to do that. So that's one data point. The other is in the Upper Willamette Basin, the 4 watershed councils, the Mackenzie River Trust and Friends of Beaufort Park, a year ago formalized something called the Upper Willamette Stewardship Network. It was essentially a formalized one-page memorandum of agreement among the 6 executive directors, because we're increasingly working in the same geographies with some of the same really thorny issues and sharing resources, that, given all limitations of time and things. And it's primarily been the executive directors for a couple of years, meeting periodically, working on a grant together, sharing a staff position and other sorts of things. And what's happened beautifully is that as staff have been all across all of our organizations wrestling with the capacities and the understanding of where they fit within their organizations, they've started to raise the question for themselves where they fit within these larger efforts, and they've started to act on it. We just had a meeting among the executive directors a couple weeks ago and found out that the finance managers or their equivalents across all these organizations were informally meeting for lunch on about a monthly basis. Totally unaware of it. Extremely effective, and I think a great lesson for the agency. I know that state agencies are far more complicated and complex, and even my guess is a project sponsor is a very real thing that allows someone to work on something that they might not otherwise have authority or something to work on. But I would encourage 2 things. One, you don't bear all of that weight. I mean, I know it's your job to set direction and try to convey to everyone how they fit, but I think you've done that with the strategic plan and the integrated plan. And what I'd like to encourage is that we give the Water Resources staff the freedom and the encouragement to not only think about and act on where they fit within the agency, but where they can fit within that larger piece, the 100-year vision. And maybe it's happening. I'd love to think that staff from Water Resources are walking across the lawn and having lunch occasionally with staff from OWEB or with Business Oregon and others, and just saying, hey, how are you guys dealing with this kind of stuff? If it's not, I encourage you to encourage. It's a funny thing as an executive director or a director. If you encourage something, it almost, like with my kids, they don't want to hear what dad has to say. But I'd encourage you to create the space to make that happen, because when it comes to really to getting ahead of something like the problems that they're having in California with water, if it's reliant on us to sort of set the direction and say, okay, now go do this, we're doomed. And on the other hand, if as you've created with the strategic plan and the integrated plan, this guiding vision where Mike can say, man, I see what I can do with that, and I'm going to call Bob and, hey, let's go have lunch and talk about this. All of a sudden, organically, a lot of great things can happen. So just would like to encourage that, and thank you for creating that space.
Any other questions, comments? You know, a year or two ago, or a few years ago, we used to get periodic reports of key performance indicators. Have you changed that kind of evaluation, or are you still doing those kind of things to measure kind of where you're going, or where you have, how are you doing that differently now because of some of the different directions we're taking?
So that's a great question. And I do think that this process, there's a couple elements that I'll mention. One, we've had a number of years ago, certainly predates my tenure, the agency went through what's called a Lean Kaizen process improvement program. And that's slightly different what we've been focusing on today or in recent years from the standpoint that it's really just breaking down existing processes and figuring out if there are better ways to get from point A to point B. It's a great exercise. It's a great tool. And I could see that type of practice playing into some of the work that we'll be doing under the strategic plan over time. But I think, Commissioner Corn, to your point, we had periodically, and Dwight French had been kind of the point on this, had been providing briefings on kind of process improvements generally, and I think it was spawned out of that effort to do Lean Kaizen. We haven't abandoned that necessarily, but I think it does kind of raise a question about how that might fit within the structure of strategic plan reports. So you might start to see that play out in some of the reporting that we'll do of the implementation of the work that we're doing under the strategic plan. So that's one. The second piece are key performance measures, which is a term of art. These are elements that are legislatively directed performance measures. You'll probably hear from Raquel on this a little bit today in terms of the budget. Our budget that's moving through the system now has some updates around our key performance measures. We'll continue to keep you in the loop on that as part of our ongoing obligations to report out annually on the KPMs, as well as keep you apprised of adjustments that are being made to those. And so we'll have some information on that today.
Any further questions? Okay, if not, then we're up to our break time. We're a couple minutes ahead, so do we want to stay around schedule and start back at 10:15? Is that okay with you? Okay. Remind the audience before we do break that for those of you who are new being in, if anyone has public comment they'd like to make, please fill out the yellow sheet and give it to Jennifer, and at the end of the meeting we'll have an opportunity for public comment for anybody. So if not, if there's nothing else come up, we'll go ahead and recess in until 10:15. Thank you.